Hello and welcome to an episode of Gotham Sound TV. We are here with Joe White in the studio.
Hello.
Hey, Joe. And Mathew Waters. He is in California. Matthew.
Hey, hey, hey.
We are here to discuss Only Murders in the Building, specifically Season 3. And I am so grateful that you guys are here.
Thanks for having us. This is great.
Yes, thank you.
But yeah, let's get right into it. So, Joe, you are the production sound mixer.
That's correct. Yep.
And I'm going to assume most of our audience knows what that means. But give us the brief version of what that means.
Basically, I'm in charge of recording and mixing down all the dialogue or sound effects that might happen on set. So mostly all dialogue on the production sets and floor or exteriors, whatever.
And you are on set, and so then you hand your tracks in to, like a nebulous post department.
It goes away in a truck.
Hey, we're people too. What do you think?
And so that's when we get to the people part of the post department. Matthew, you are listed as re-recording mixer and supervisor. Is that right? Sound supervisor.
Sound supervisor. Yeah.
And
on this one I do 2 jobs, and Lindsay mixes the dialogue and music. I mix the sound effects and Foley and backgrounds. And then, of course, as a sound supervisor, I'm responsible for the entire soundscape of the show. And I can't thank Joe every day more because just quickly, since, from a post perspective, production sound is what can make or break the end quality of your track and the story you're trying to tell. And Joe always delivers incredible dialogue and lets us do what we need to do with it. But he gathers it where it's warm and it's really represents what's there, and it doesn't hurt your ears. He does a great job.
Thank you. That was a great compliment.
That is,
I think from Mathew Waters, who's the master. He's the guy behind the curtain that is pulling strings and doing things. I'm like, how did you make it sound? How did you put it together like that? I never see what's going on back there, but I know whatever I send back there comes out beautiful, and I'm like, I'm happy. I'm so happy about that.
Yeah. No. Even from the moment that we sent out the emails suggesting this, the compliments came in.
Oh, yeah.
And, that makes me so incredibly happy for both of you. How have you guys spoken to each other? I take it you have. But, tell me about the contact that you guys have had with each other during the season.
Okay. Well, I know we've worked together, kind of together before. But on season, we spoke a lot on season 1. The idea is a lot of times on television shows, the post sound people aren't really hired until we're into the season. At least that was my knowledge. And so I didn't get to talk to what was happening at post. And then I would always see at the end how it came out. And I was sometimes happy, sometimes disappointed, sometimes confused. But this was different, knowing that Mathew was on the show in season 1. I thought, there's this issue. I want to talk to the post people and see how is there a way that they can solve this, or do I have to fight for something else? And then we started talking and talking more, and I realized that collaboration was helpful for me on set to know what was possible. On the back end, I knew what I really needed to gun for on set.
I want to get back to that, and before we get too deep into it, for those not familiar with Only Murders in the Building, it's a Hulu series starring Steve Martin, Martin Short, Selena Gomez, and this season Meryl Streep. Paul Rudd, a couple of beginning actors.
Yeah.
Starting out in the career. They have a big future ahead of them, I think.
Yeah.
But it revolves around a fictional building on the Upper West Side.
Right. that murder happens.
Seemingly every season. Yes. And so, to get back to what you said, you tell me a little bit about, like, you get it starts with a script, I imagine.
Right.
And so, walk me through that process once you get the script.
Right. A lot of times I'll get an idea of what the show is about from whoever hired me. Usually it's a production manager or a UPM that I know, and I get a gist of what the show is about. Then I get a script, or at least if I'm doing a TV show, the first two scripts, and I pour through it and to see what's happening. If this is something that's fast-paced, lots of dialogue going on, is it action? Is it a love thing where it's romantic? And then I to start to decipher how I should approach it as a mixer, judging microphones, total approach to how I want to record it. A lot of times it changes when you start day one. And you realize, like, oh, we're using 3 cameras. Okay. All right. Okay. Every day. All right. Okay. Then now I understand. Now this is a different animal now, but you have to go in with a plan of how you want it to sound, how you want it to approach it.
Tell me an example of, like, when you said you could reach out to the post sound team.
Oh, sure.
What can you think of something?
Yeah. If I can talk about season 1 of this show, we had we had quite a few car scenes in that show, and a lot of dialogue and we were doing it inside in green screen, but where we were shooting, it was very loud. There was a live warehouse, like basically 5 feet away from where we were shooting. And I'm thinking to myself that this is not going to work. This is insane. There's a crazy buzz there. We're inside a car, yes, and so what I do is I talk to Matthew, and he said, send me, what you have, what it sounds like. I sent him a sample of the scene, a part of it, and had him listen to it and see, well, is this going to kill us? And that's when I knew, when he came back to me, he said, no, we could do this, we could do that, don't worry about it, we got this. I'm like, but on set, you can relax and actually work on now how you're recording this out, how you're capturing it, and not really worry about that noise, because it can be, attenuated, or I'm not sure what the magic that you did, but it freed me to really just work on sonic quality of the actors and the scene itself.
Absolutely, and it's funny because Noor, I see, is commenting, would like to know, when you read the script, what are you focusing besides the technical needs of the show?
Yeah.
And that question dovetails really nicely into season 3, which is, because we had some conversations about it.
Sure. Yeah.
The word, when did you hear the first word musical? When did you hear that word bandied about?
Well, the funny thing is that last season, that was thrown out. That was thrown about a little bit because they wanted to do a musical like episode or number, and because I talk to Steve Martin and Martin Short, every day. Steve mentioned that in passing that they were going to do this music. They wanted to really do this musical episode. I thought, oh, okay, that would be interesting. I'd like to do that. And then that's when it started to snowball. It was by the end of the second season, I heard more about the fact that there's probably going to be a lot of music in the next episode. In fact, a lot of music
in the next season.
A season. Sorry, yeah. And that was my first clue. And when I picked up the first script, it doesn't smack. That it's a show, but you don't know it's a musical. And even when I got the first 3 scripts, it was its first 2 scripts really. I thought, okay, well, this is all right. It's kind of a light musical, not knowing that how far it was going, like a full musical production. I thought, oh, okay. It was kind of snowballed, but I knew it was coming.
Right, yeah. and there'll be some spoilers if you haven't seen any of what Hulu has released, just FYI, because it is not clear from the first episode that, you know, the idea for the characters.
Yeah, they wanted, but he wants to turn his play into a musical.
Right. And Matthew, for you, tell me about your process. So how much contact do you get from the scripts? When do you get involved? Do you get involved before they shoot, after they shoot?
On Only Murders, I get involved before the shoot, but it is rare that a sound person is hired, especially in TV, before they start shooting. In this case, it just happened that was the case.
And just to be clear, because our audience are mainly production sound mixers, when you say a sound person hired, you mean post-production sound.
Good point.
No. It's
yeah. You mean he's a person too. Okay. But no, but I do want to say some things that Joe said that I think is really extremely important. The communication between post and production. You know, when I first got in this business, I was scared of what happened on the set. I never knew what happened on the set, and I didn't realize actually there were nice people there and everybody wanting the same thing, right? And then, you know, as you get further and along in your career and you get more confident, you realize you're all in this together. And so I think it's super important for post and production to reach out. And on that particular scene, and I love the way Joe said it, he, you know, once he knew he didn't have to worry about the noise, he could concentrate on making the dialogue sound good. Mm-hmm. And I tell young mixers in post, re-recording mixers, that you're not there to mix the noise. You're there to mix the dialogue. Mm-hmm. You know, and a lot of people so concern themselves with noise, and sometimes you need to. But I think that's just fantastic. We are artists in the end, and we want everything to sound as full as possible. And when you get that communication, it really helps. On this season, you know, they did a lot more different type of shooting styles. And I know Joe called me and goes, "Oh man, can you listen to this, please? I'm worried about this. This is not, I can't get my boom in close enough. Oh, I'm sorry, Matt," you know. So of course I check it out. And of course, it sounds awesome. And I go, "We're good. I love it when he calls. Like when some other people call, I'm like, yeah, that's not good. Yeah, we're gonna have to work on that." But no, but anyway, so, and then I do like the fact that Joe just slightly put in that, you know, he talks to Steve Martin every day. Not many people get to do that. No. It's pretty good.
That's funny.
But anyway, but no, we do. I do read the scripts ahead of time. I start designing stuff based on this. Also, in this particular season with the songs, I get together with pre-production as much as possible. How are we going to do this? Who's going to do what when it comes to this? Because you have singing, you have pre-records, you have what we call production singing, and then how do we meld that all together? ADR as well, ADR singing, and how do we make it all work?
Yes,
it's a pretty complex season, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Now, you said something that really struck a chord with me about, Joe, you called and you were worried about not being able to get the boom in. Yeah. And Matthew, you seemed like that could have made you sad if that were the case. How important to you?
Yeah, I got to tell you, because Joe's boom work, it really saves the show. The boom is the best mic.
Now I have to say,
yes.
My boom operators are world-class boom operators. Kira Smith, who has been around the block, and previous there was Jason Benjamin on season 1, and Jason and I have done work for 10 years together, and now Kira's with us, and TR Boyce,
amazing team.
You know, I can't do without Kira and without TR. I can't do what I do. I can't mix the right things. I can't get the boom where I need. When I know that, you know, they walk on set and I don't have to worry about the set. They're gonna, if they have an issue that that is basically above their heads, then they involve me. But otherwise, they take care of the set, and so Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, because I
No,
need to
thank
shout
you
out
to
that.
the
Yeah.
entire crew, because I mean, a lot of times with the radios, we're trying to make it sound like the boom.
Right.
We're like, I wish we could have the boom on that one. Sometimes when I'm mixing, I'll look at, if I'm not the sound supervisor, I'll look at a sound supervisor and I'll see that I only have the ISOs. I'll be like, can we get the boom? I mean, I'm sure there's a boom for this. Why wouldn't there be a boom, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, that everybody always goes to the ISOs. Because of ease, I guess, or whatnot.
Right.
But give me the boom all day long.
Yeah. The isolated tracks he's talking about are mostly the wires. I use a lot of plants as well. So that's been, you know, just another tool for, you know, for Mathew if he needs to pull something up, or Lindsay that's like sitting in front of, well, there's one scene I'll talk about, a plant mic that works great because we have a lot of, it's a show about a podcast.
Yes.
So I use those practically as much as possible, and so they have something to go to, so if they need that style, and I had to think about that. We talked about that before I even started the show, working. You know, how does a podcast sound, and I had to figure that out.
Yeah.
And you helped out a lot in that. You know.
No,
That's another thing. Sorry, that's another thing Joe and I talked about. Was I just remembered, I forgot about it. But you know what mic he wanted to use for the podcast, if it's okay if we use that and this, and we talked about it, and there was a plan going ahead, as opposed to him just doing something and then I get it and I'm like, oh, how come you didn't do this? All this. So again, communication at the beginning is very important. Very important.
Yeah, definitely.
I think this is a good segue into the first clip, which is the table read, because I think with this talk of you know, the boom track, you know, to my ears, what we're really talking about is a full, rich voice in a room that makes sense to where the camera is relative to the voice.
Right.
And the table read, just to set it up for people, is the first time when all of the actors for this fictitious play come together.
Right.
We're only going to show part of it, but there is a tapestry of voices, and they're all at different levels and in different places in the room.
Yeah.
And let's listen, and we'll talk about it on the other side. Let's watch.
All right, so this is kind of exciting. Shall we begin, KT?
From the top, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you page 1.
I wasn't ready. It's a night in Upper Nova Scotia.
Oh, hot damn, that is a hot schmackery. Sorry, I just had a corner. No more. Sorry. Reading.
A detective makes his way toward the audience. He is our narrator.
What turned me into a creature of the night? Let me tell you. I just finished up a case in Halifax when I got a call about some curious goings-on at the old Pickwick Lighthouse. I made my way to see for myself.
A lighthouse appears, and a storm shelter door opens. A nanny emerges from the shelter.
Storm's coming. Don't take that for roaming in the rocks.
I'm sorry. I think I missed some of those words.
Oh, I was trying a Scottish dialect.
Because the nannies...
The nanny refers to a childhood in Aberdeen.
Right.
Or not.
No. It's okay to try things. Let's just go again.
A nanny emerges from the shelter.
Storm's coming. Don't see it's a night for roaming on the rocks. French-Canadian. Because it's up in the Maritimes there. So, a lot of French. I'm sorry, it's, this is my process. It's just how I find the nanny's voice.
You know what? Maybe we try it slightly more how you talk.
A nanny emerges from the shelter.
Storm's coming. Don't think it's a night for roaming on the rocks.
I don't go roaming anywhere.
Oh my God, it's me. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, it's me. Isn't it?
It's your line, yes.
You know what? I didn't highlight that one. I'm
Yeah.
gonna do that right now.
Good. Now you'll always have it there because it's highlighted.
Okay.
I love that scene.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I love Meryl Streep's bad accent. So, Joe, you were on set.
I was on set.
You must. I mean, this must have been like a 10-page scene or something, or 8-page.
Yeah. And we spent, I think, 3 days in that little. Basically, it was a holding for background, and they, instead of going to a real rehearsal studio that we were going to shoot in, they're like, "Oh, we'll just make this." And I'm like, "Really?" Because that's real windows back there. There's a live street. And I'm thinking, this is terrible, and it's reflective. I couldn't deaden it enough because they used 3 cameras for that, for all those scenes in there.
So, for those not familiar, what does that mean to you when they have 3 cameras?
Because it's a U-shaped table, and they wanted to get as much of the room and people as they could in one each take. So each of the coverage, they wanted to get as much as they could every time they did it. So they used 3 cameras, which meant that there was a camera on Steve, there was a camera over here on this side, there was a camera. So I had 3 primary targets all the time, or at least directions that I had to worry about all the time. So I employed 3 boom operators at one point because there was no way to really play it on the booms when they're so far apart, or if they do a wide and then 2 tights, which is always really tough.
So, did they always have complementary angles, or did they sometimes do wide?
They sometimes did wide and a medium shot because I had to fight for it because ultimately they had other shots that they could get that were more comparable to the wide shot.
Right.
So and it's just about how we're approaching each one, whether we were, sometimes it's just a shots that they needed. It makes sense together, and then for us. And if they could do that, I push for them to do that, to do comparable shots. Even if it was wide, they had 2 other shots that were are equally wide, so it sounded the same sonically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it worked out. It worked out really well. But I listen to it on headphones because I haven't listened to it in a while. I remember hearing the background, the cars in the back, and it puts you. It's like, oh, it's New York City, and I hated it on the day. When I listen to it now, I'm like, oh no, that's all right. I kind of like that. You could hear it.
Well, so there's so many places we can go. One thing is for mixers thinking about how to handle multicam stuff. Right. Your approach of sort of fighting for as complementary as possible, I think, really gives you a fighting chance. Right. I stole from Ed Novick, hi Ed, if you're watching, to try and hand out $20 bills to the director, camera operator. Rarely worked. But so that's something that we can sort of implore people to do.
Absolutely.
But to keep the sound consistent, and Matthew, I hear this, and I've heard this now a couple of times on headphones. It sounds so seamless, and I am like you said, Joe. I am at like a pretty crummy rehearsal studio in Midtown Manhattan, and there's never a moment that I'm taken out of that. Mm-hmm. I'm just completely enraptured by these voices, this tapestry of voices. Right. How do you handle something like that when you get, I imagine, hundreds of takes over the course of 3 days?
Yeah, that scene was super difficult on myriads of level. Luckily, we got great source material from Joe and his crew. But they also, that scene used to be a lot longer, so they've cut it up, and lines going into other lines, and sometimes reverb tails from an angle would be cut, and then you had some traffic issues, and again, if you make everything smooth, then it just feels real. It's when it gets bumpy that it's not good. And so we would use alt takes, and we use some ADR in there. One of my favorites is, working with Meryl Streep, and I had her do her lip flaps. If you ever watch the scene again, there's a cut, and you see her go, so she did that in ADR for me, and I go, oh my gosh, I got Meryl Streep to do that. That's amazing. But anyway, so there's ADR mixed with production alts, and production takes, and it takes, the dialogue editor, Lindsay, mixing it, Joe's stuff, and his crew, and then, and then also, that scene, story-wise, I needed it to be as quiet as possible to make it as uncomfortable as possible. Right. And so we did a lot of cleanup of any kind of extra noise. If you listen to it again, you really don't hear anything that you don't see. And there's one time Paul Rudd takes his glasses off, which, enhances the uncomfortableness that you can hear that, right? Yeah. And so it was difficult. But it was super fun, and I love the way it came out. But again, you can't even begin to get there if you don't have quality from the production side come to the post side. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I love working with Joe and his crew. And I mean, I can't say it enough. Yeah. And the fact that the dialogue always sounds rich. A lot of times we'll get people that production, not that I'm telling you guys what you don't already know, but from our side, we get production mixers that'll try and EQ a lot of stuff or a lot of noise out. And I'll have to call them after if I get the first set of dailies. I'll be like, stop that. We'll take care of the noise. I need if you take out the frequencies of the dialogue, I can't put them back.
I think a lot of people don't understand that, and learning more about post and what can and can't be done, you can't. It's hard to add. You can't add frequencies back into a stripped voice, but you can more skillfully attenuate that after when you can identify those specific frequencies. Ours is our broad strokes, what we do on set.
Oh, we have. I mean, even if you have a sophisticated digital mixer, it's still we're in the trenches.
Yeah, exactly.
We can take the discussion in so many different places. Sure. One, I want to point out, on set there were probably 100 crew people in that room. Yeah. Only 4 of which, if you had a third boom op, were concerned with the sound.
Right. Only three boom. Well, for most of those days, I only had 2 boom operators. Mm-hmm. So I had to fight to make sure that we got a boom for every camera, or pretty much everybody talking on camera. There's some things like Bobo's line wasn't scripted. It's like, it's your line. That wasn't a scripted thing.
That's amazing because, he's whispering it.
He's whispering.
And it's followed by a scream.
Yeah. And it was a surprise when we first did it. And I'm thinking, who was that? I was like, are we now Bobo's has a line there? And so I think the first take, it was on the wire because I didn't know what was happening. Right. And I was concentrating on so many things. I think the next take, I'm like, Kira, got to go over there and get Bobo. And then so Kira had to do double duty to get Bobo, and then go back to Meryl, who is like you said, an explosion, and then the laugh, and it was really tough for the boom operators, for Kira and TR, and I had Ken Strain with me at one point too, so I had excellent coverage. I had excellent boom operators on the set, but dealing with 3 cameras and this great crew, great cast of people, it was still nerve-wracking to being able to get everything.
Yeah, and I want to turn to you, Matthew, and you said something about wanting to make it be uncomfortable as possible, sound uncomfortable as possible, and
That was my goal.
Did that come from the storyteller in you? Like, where does that instinct come from?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'd like to think if people work with me, they realize, you know, whether right or wrong, I'm always thinking about story and how the audience should feel about a particular scene. And for instance, in that scene too, music used to come in earlier, and you know, I asked everyone, I go, hey, can we try it without the music coming in until Meryl does her thing? Because when the music was there, I lost the uncomfortableness that I was searching for the whole time, that we worked so hard in cleaning up everything to get to. And luckily, you know, the showrunner, John Hoffman, picture editor, everybody, they're like, okay, let's try. You know, they're very communal. Like, if anybody's got an idea, let's see if it makes it work. And so sure enough, we tried it, and you know, I think it's better that way, and so did they. And I just think you're just watching it, you're crying for Meryl. You're like, oh my gosh, it's horrible. Like you almost want to leave the room, like you can't watch it.
It's a great call.
And that choice comes from your experience, though. I think there's a lot of people that, you know, would have let them bring the music in, everything sounds great, but your experience saying, well, if John, you know what John's looking for, and you go, well, if you really want this is, you know, if you wait and you listen to this uncomfortably, like sonically, you're going to get more of what you're looking for. And that's experience. That's experience telling you. That's years and years of doing that and knowing emotionally how it connects. I think what post-sound people do are a lot more artistic. If I send them great tracks and enough stuff, they have more artistic ability in post to make it a better show.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the call to make the music later doesn't allow us, the audience, to have any tension release. Like it just.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
that's
it's a great call.
And that's and Joe's right. There's like some films or shows that I'll work on where the dialogue, and look, there's no doubt, everyone in post realizes we don't want to be the production sound mixer. Ever. We cannot do that job. That is a skill that we do not have. But sometimes, again, some of the production sound mixers will worry about the noise and EQ stuff. So on the day, we're not being creative storytellers. We're being technical. How do we make this work? And that's why it's such a team effort.
It takes away from the whole production if they can't be creative. That's the creative sound comes from post. I feel it, and I have an eye to that, and I have to work toward that. But ultimately, they have a lot of creative ability, and so if I give them good enough tracks and fat enough sound, they can do a myriad of things with it. Yeah.
And so I'm gonna, you know, this discussion will sort of veer between the like technical nerd stuff and the high level stuff. But I want to go back to something that you said, which was don't EQ on the production side, and mechanically, what does that look like? Like, you know, in other words, are the ISOs clean, but the production, you know, stuff going to the production mix is EQ'd?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of old school, so a lot of the things I listen to it as if it's what I want to hear at the end. So I make it sound like it's a real show on my mix. But what happens is if I'm focusing on a low-end rumble, and I could EQ it out, and so it sounds cleaner without the rumble, but the bottom end of the voice gets thinner. The voice gets thinner, and I'd rather have a fat sound, even if that's a little rumble is in there. I need to hear the voices the way I want to hear them, and if I EQ, I could EQ more. But and sometimes I do use EQ for some instances, but it's not. I want to hear it at the end. as if I don't have a post. You know, as if there's no post doesn't exist. You know, I listen back to it. I'm like, I want to hear it. Like, okay, we could plop this in.
Right. I mean,
right now.
My favorite moments as a production mixer, and I'm waving my hand because I don't really do that full time anymore. But like when I'm on set looking at the monitor, and it's as if I'm in the movie theater.
Yeah.
Already, you know. But
that's cool.
But then we do have this tool now, which is the isolated tracks. Yeah. And so that's got the full frequency.
Right. All my ISO tracks are dry.
Yeah.
So there's no EQ on them. There's nothing on them. And my mix is what's a little wet.
Yeah.
And so this way.
And excuse me one second, just to interrupt. As far as Rumble's a great example, because we have tools in post where we can deal with rumbles for sure, and that's where you'll see we actually have EQs now that have graphs, and they can show the waveform, and they can show what the frequency signal is of the thing, and we can open up our EQ where we're going to start EQing, and we're like, God, there's no low end in this dialogue, and we open up our EQ, and sure enough, you can just see where it's cut off way too hard, and it's gone. It's gone. Yeah. And so, and again, that's why we can get, I mean, you guys are on set, it's noisy, it's everything. Why? Here's what I have to say. You have enough to do.
Right.
Let us do one thing.
No, before I used to equate what I do as the MASH unit. Because the MASH unit, they get a patient come in and they're torn apart, and they put them together best they can, and then they send it to the real hospital to do the fine stuff. And I've always said that, but in essence, what I've been doing was mixing as if it's what I would want to hear in the end. So even when there's music introduced, I have that in the mix. I have it going up and down in the mix. I have it playing like it's in the room in the mix, or if there's a conversation with a lot of people, I always try to get the off camera because I want that scene to sound like complete there. And the fact that I don't EQ was more like the liking to my ears. I not really realizing until I spoke, to like Mathew and Annalie, that was helpful. That what I was doing was helpful. I'm like, thank God, because I don't know how I would change.
Right.
I'm not sure. Thank goodness it's working for them.
And we touched on something that, in our initial conversations, Mathew, about doing this show, I said, there's a trend of production mixers sometimes believe that their production mix is immediately thrown away when it gets to post sound. And you said, no, that is not true. Can you comment? First of all, did I get that right? And second of all, what happens to the production mix that the production mixer turns in when it goes to post?
Oh, I see. The production mix track. Okay, yeah. I got what you're saying. Oh, you know what? A lot of times it will be used as reference. Not a lot of times. Every time it's used as reference. But we do an assembly through the split track, so we have more control. Because sometimes, all of a sudden, the ISO's louder, this person's louder, the boom's louder, and there's no way for us to control it. So when you send us the tracks, we'll actually do an assembly of all your different tracks, and we'll edit the dialogue with everything live. And then but with regards to the mix track, the mix track is super helpful, one, for the picture editors, because they're not going to bring in all the different tracks. And if that's a mess, it's harder for them to cut the picture. Yeah. I mean, it really is. Yeah. And then for us as a guide, it really helps us to know what they've been hearing, what they've been listening, and how they want to hear it, and where we can make it better, we're going to make it better for sure. Yeah. So in the final, it's not necessarily used in the final track, except for the fact it's a tool for us to reference throughout the process.
And I do think, that the art of making a production mix You know, I would like to see it continue to be advanced.
Right. Absolutely.
You know,
absolutely. Well, there's one thing politically for me. The production mix is sometimes, and I learned this from other mixers like Scott Brindell and Todd and stuff. That what they're hearing in dailies is that mix.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the only thing that these executive producers will hear are my mix track.
Right.
So it has to sound like as amazing as possible, just for politically, just for that, just to stay in in the swing of things. And because if you hand them a mess, they're going to be. That's sometimes the only thing they're listening till the very end. And they're like, your sound mixer is terrible.
Right. What's going on with your sound mixer?
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
because sometimes the people that are listening to dailies aren't. They don't know what the process is.
They're not in the process.
Yeah.
They only hear what's going on set basically. And
I would say that's not sometimes. I'd say it's more often than not. That, and it took me a while to learn that. Like I thought everybody knew what everybody did.
Right.
And they don't, whether we're on a mix, or what have you. But I mean, I've had picture editors like almost be in panic mode. They're going, "Oh my gosh, this production dialogue, I can't." I'm like, "Oh, send me a scene. Give me the assembly. It's great. Here, I'll send it back to you."
Right.
And that's literally just because the mix was, the person was obviously hurried and rushed and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yet they got me great tracks. And I go, no, everything's great.
Right.
It's good.
Yeah.
I learned.
But sometimes you don't have that luxury, and then they just go, "We've got to get a new production sound mix."
Well, that's a danger of rash decisions.
Yeah,
I learned that the in a funny way because back when dailies were a thing, a DP said, I don't ever want to go to dailies when they don't have the sounds synced up.
Right.
Because when there's no sound, people start picking apart the picture in meaningless ways.
Yeah. Because the sound is when you start with a show, it's just words.
Yeah.
It's just words. And if you don't capture that, you don't have a show. Right. It's like they make a joke like, "Oh, it's there's always been picture without sound, forever." I'm like, yeah, but who is watching that? Like, who's watching that? And like, story comes. Yes, you could build story, not without sound, but without dialogue. But like we did last season, where there was no dialogue, but there was plenty of sound.
Yeah,
and there was a lot going on, and that told a larger story as well, and that was important. But I'm like, no, it's important. So what they're saying is important.
I think that this is a good moment to see the next clips, which I picked these two out, and in my mind, I kind of want to play them back to back. It's when it first becomes a musical, or they're first exploring it.
Right.
It's in the story. It's just a jump in time.
Right.
But they're very much related. Right. And I am intensely curious how you guys pulled this off.
All together. Are you a creature of the night? Is it you? Is it you? Of the night? Is it you? Is it true? And you hold that note, and Charles higher, and the Tony Award goes to the night. So that's our showstopper. Do you love it or do you love it?
I think it's brilliant. Oh, so sorry, I'm late.
1 and 2, and here come the crabmen.
The what?
And the crabmen are breeding. And now, cue the nanny. Who goes there? The creatures of the night. Well, it's a start. Give me 1 or 2 seconds to collect my thoughts. You're screwed, Putnam! Your dreams are dust now. Welcome to hell, and you're your own Satan.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Ow, ow, ow. I'm just saying that maybe alternative financing might reduce your stress.
Well, guys, we are so close. So why don't we start fresh tomorrow morning?
Yeah, it's always best to end when you're on a high or near a high.
I love that.
Which one?
I love, first of all, the part on the stage for the Creatures of the Night. Those rattles didn't have rattles in them because it would be stupid noisy on set. So I'm like, I was wondering what it was going to sound like. And so, because they were, shaking and like nothing's happening because they took the rattles out. And I'm like, all right, okay, well, I know eventually they're going to be, I know we didn't talk about that, but I was like, it's obvious. It seemed obvious to me. And I was dealing with a lot. So,
yeah.
So me and Matthew didn't get to talk about it. I assumed like, oh, this is going to be great, whatever it is. And I was like, oh yeah, I hear the rattles. It sounds so like real. I like that you can hear that. But anyway.
And speaking of real, like the voices sound really great.
Right. That was difficult because just the level, and we always, I love, as a sound mixer, I love people who speak up and a lot of stage actors, they really know how to project, and it makes it easier for me to record them. But that was a little hot. It was always hot, and you knew it was going to be hot.
Right.
The piano thing was a thing, adding the piano, because that was live. That was done live.
So the whole thing was done live.
Yeah, we had to do it live because we see the piano, and there was no real. There was a pre-record, but we had use of it, and we also had a MIDI piano, so it could be muted there, and then a MIDI going into a module, so that we hear exactly what he's playing, but you don't hear it on set unless we added it, and you hear it in their little earpieces. There was a lot going on in that scene.
Yeah. So the piano playing was live, but it wasn't necessarily like a live acoustic piano
Correct.
room. Got it. Yeah. Cool.
But we recorded MIDI as well, so that they can track it later and add a really nice sounding synthesized piano or a real piano if they wanted to, play it out.
Yeah.
But all that was recorded live, so that they had all those elements.
And actors had earwigs.
Actors had earwigs, and they were, not all of them were singing, but most of them were singing. Trying to think.
And then the challenging thing of the dialogue right afterwards, going right into dialogue.
Fortunately, with Marty, it stays at that hot level. Yeah. Which knowing that, it's like, okay, I know what to do with Marty. But then Meryl comes in the very back.
Yeah.
And she's not as loud. And I remember doing a close-up shot, knowing that there's no way they're going to use a close-up of her when you have this great shot behind the piano and she enters. So that line is going to be in that wide. I knew that going into it, that they were going to use that because it was the better shot for that. Yeah.
Absolutely. But and Matthew, this is where I'm going to turn to you. It plays. Like the whole thing plays in perfect camera perspective. It sounds great.
Right.
I mean, it's remarkable.
It came out nice. It came out nice. Matthew did a great job.
Yeah, it came out. Yeah, I mean, it was.
And Lindsay.
To be honest, that was a lot of Joe and his team, and then Lindsay mixing the dialogue, and then of course the dialogue editorial. But I think that's pretty much all what was done on set, if I remember correctly. And then what's nice is when we have these different angles, or we have the boom and the ISO, like when Meryl's further away, we have boom and ISO, we can use more boom on her and less ISO. Yeah. And then that's a more worldizing, if you will, than us. Yes, we can add reverb to her ISO and make it, but it'll always sound not as good, right?
Yeah.
And so having the boom available, and again, sometimes we can't use the boom. Oh, yep, the boom didn't work then. Okay, that's fine. Right. But again, any kind of choices you can give post as a production sound mixer, we appreciate.
And you're hitting on some of the questions we're getting. But you said a word that I love, which is world eyes. And there's a moment of worldizing when Martin Short's character goes into the kitchen.
Oh, yeah.
But we hear him from the perspective of
Sure.
being in the living room.
Yeah.
I wanted to nerd out and ask, did you have a mic? Like, how did they?
Yeah. I had a well, for that little kitchen scene, I had one of my boom operators in there because even when we were on the other side of the door, we needed to record that as well. So every take, you know, he could go to it if we wanted to, and so we had that all the time. And he was wired with with a DPA that was the attenuated version.
I was just going to ask, yeah.
Because the red dots.
The Pavarotti version.
Yeah. And that I don't, and again, I love the DPA microphones and they work great with my Electros. I'm throwing those names out there. But there's some, I love a wide open mic. So I try to use the non-attenuated mics all the time. And I only switch them out if I feel like I'm going to have a problem, and because I feel it's more rich sounding. Yes, you get close to the hairy edge, but I'd rather ride that line than to give Mathew anything that's kind of pinched. You know,
Yeah.
Especially.
And if I could add to that, I'm sorry, because you brought up a great point. That's another thing that happens is sometimes production mixers, not all of them, of course, but sometimes they'll rely on their compression or their limiter, and that just takes the life out of the performances.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when we're sitting there mixing, we want to raise a line so it's a little bit more in your face, and no matter how much we raise it, because it's been limited earlier, it still sounds far away, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a great point. And what we do in post, we like to call that air. We like to call it a breeze. You know, because sometimes when we're mixing, we use the compressor or limiter too much, and we're like, oh my gosh, it's not really breathing right now. And then we let it open. We're like, oh, it was us. Okay, I'll stop yelling at the production sound. So sometimes it could be us too. But that's a really great point that I wanted to say on our side, on the post side, that we like it when it's open and free.
Right. Yeah. I think generally that's the large consensus for sound people in general. That would be true. Like less attenuation. Recording classical music is, you know, the dynamic range is really wide.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but I would always ride the hairy edge where the orchestra is at, you know, triple forte, and I'm like, hanging on by, it's like, is this going to overmodulate? I don't want to attenuate it. And it's but that whole philosophy, because you get the best sound.
That is, you know, one thing that I miss about analog, and not just analog tape, which is obvious, which had like a really sort of graceful degradation about it.
Sure.
But even like the old school mixers with transformers and stuff that would saturate, you know, slowly.
Yeah.
It is a lot harder to manage when you're on a digital recorder with a control surface.
Yeah. And that's,
especially when you're mixing for dailies.
Yeah.
You know, and finding that balance.
Yeah. That's, I don't want to say this, but one of the reasons why I stuck with my analog board is the sound. And some of these control surfaces are amazing.
It's
absolutely
incredible.
amazing.
So much lighter.
It's
so many
great,
benefits.
and you have 16 tracks, and it's easy to lug around because Mathew doesn't have to worry about lugging his gear through the streets of New York, and we do, which is you'd be happy that you don't, Mathew. But
I'm super happy.
But the sonic quality I'm able to achieve with this analog board. Not to mention the fact that I can take a channel out and replace it. It is a beefy thing. There's a lot more I think sonically I can do with it. That's not a knock on any of the control surfaces.
No, and there's huge benefits.
Yeah, and that's the way everything is going to go. I believe in the future, but man, it's hard to get away from that sound. I don't want to change so much that, you know, that sound. If I'm not happy with the sound I'm getting, then what am I doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to bring in some of the viewers into the discussion. I would love to know how likely Post is to find hidden gems in the ISOs. For example, plants used to capture 1 or 2 lines only, or one boom op grabbing a single word before transferring to another. Yeah, that's something that happens all the time where, it's really just there for when they enter. And that's probably an obvious example, but sometimes it's like a waiter passing by or whatever. Matthew, what do you need from us to pick that out, if anything?
Well, I think the person that asked that is absolutely, I would say, tons of times. There's many times where, once you start cleaning up the dialogue, this happens on Only Murders for sure. Once you start cleaning up the dialogue, you might not notice something. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh, what's that bang on Marty's line or something like that? Like, we never heard that before. And all of a sudden, then we don't want to loop them for that line. So we go through production alts, and whether that be from mics and anywhere, we'll take it. And then what we do is we try and match performance, and then we put it in. It's almost like production ADR, if you will, and we do it all the time.
Well, speaking of production ADR, you talk about alts and using alts, but alts don't necessarily have to be a take that wasn't selected. How often can you pull an alt from, say, somebody else's coverage? And is that something you'd encourage production mixers to make sure to get?
Oh, I would just encourage them to just concentrate on what they need to do on the day. I would never tell them to concentrate on other things, because I don't know if I would ever use it. But I do know this, that when we're in a playback, and especially once everything's cleaned up, inevitably will somebody go, oh, I don't like the way he says that line now. Do we have an alt? Oh, is there an alt for that line? And we love, it's like sometimes we go, oh, no, there's no alts, or the alts are unusable, right? And so it's great to have those alts, because then, everybody's happy, and the showrunner, the director, everybody's like, oh my gosh, you fixed that. It's amazing. And really, yes, we did fix it, but we couldn't have fixed it. And this is why we love the production team so much, because when you have a great one, it just makes, again, I don't mean to be a broken record, but it does make the final product so much better. It really does. No joke.
And as far as the off-camera goes, we always try to get the off-camera on a boom, because sometimes there's a scene where we weren't able to get the boom really close. Like, let's see. Well, this is we have a free take, basically. So if there's 3 people talking and one's off camera, and we weren't able to get them, great. Well, maybe they can use this somewhere. I don't know if they can slip it in, but I always throw a boom on it if I can, or a plant, like I'll pull up a plant, and TR's runs around a lot today, figuring out places where you can put plants at work. Like, we could put it right here. Like,
that's awesome.
Like, okay.
And that's a great answer to that, because I don't necessarily know where we get the alts. If it's from take 7 or from offer angle. We're just going to be listening to them. Oh my gosh, I found it. It's a gem. Thank you.
Yeah. And someone asked about where if you can put it in the notes, if that's where we do it. And the truth is that you really should have notes plainly where everything is and where they can find it. But a lot of times I feel like nobody's looking at the notes deeper in.
No, I agree.
And
I think we're about to say the same thing, maybe. Sometimes if I think something's really important for editorial, I'll ask the script supervisor to note it down.
I've done that a bunch.
Well, you know what's funny about that is, because I've been doing this for a long time, back when we got Nagra or DATs even and stuff like that, the notes were like, you couldn't do anything without the notes, right? And now that everything's digital, it just comes in, it's got its numbers, it's got its metadata, so so you don't find yourself going to the notes as much, but I love it when they're there, and I can track them and stuff, but it's something I used all the time 10 years ago or 15 years ago,
Right,
whatever.
right.
And now, because of budgets or time and stuff like that, I just need an alt.
Yeah. I think it's still a good practice to do, so that so we know as sound mixers and production sound mixers, because sometimes I'll look back on the notes. It's like, what happened there? Did I have 3 mics on that person? Like, oh yeah, I did. Oh, and I starred that, so I'm like, I wanted them to use that. And if I have something like that that's really important, I'll like call Matthew.
Yeah.
Like, Matthew, all right. I'll leave a message. Like, call me back. Call me back. I'm like, oh yeah, this scene. And I send him the scene number. Like, we did this. Okay, so it's not in the mix or something, but you'll find it here. So if it's really important, that's why, again, communication between posts is really important. I can't stress that enough. Talk to the post people.
No, it makes a huge difference. All through the chain, every post person. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I definitely want to get to some people's questions. A question that comes up: how often do you use room tone? Is it an automatic thing or not anymore, thanks to plugins? Do you like room tone, Matthew? What?
I do.
Like a dedicated take.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get it. I get how fast you guys need to go, how fast the setups are. But like there was one, I worked on a film where they shot it in the South in the summertime, and they tried to turn off the AC in the room, and the actors could not act. And so the sound person calls me. Hey, I said, same thing, send it to me. I go, it's pretty nasty, but if you could give me I will call the director myself. You need to give me at least a minute or two of just that sound. Yeah. Because again, then you get into the world where if you can make it smooth, then no one notices it, right? It's just part of the soundscape. Right. But yeah, so the room tone, I'm a big believer in it.
Nice. And along those lines, same person asking about stereo ambience or anything like that. Do you have any feelings about that, Matthew? Should if we can get you stereo?
Well, for me, I'll take any kind of recordings you can give me because I love sound. But the reality is we put the dialogue mainly in the center speaker. So anything we want to be believable that it was done on set is going to go attach itself to the dialogue in the center speaker as well. So stereo for a room tone wouldn't necessarily matter. The room we're going to put birds that we recorded in stereo, crickets, whatever, even a room tone that we've done in stereo. But what I need to smooth out that dialogue track is something that sounds like that dialogue track, and it's going to go into the same speaker. It's going to go right up to the center. Right. So I don't need a stereo on that.
Well, half the reason why, because I was supposed to come out to Matthew in the stage there to sit in one of the mixes, because it's like I want to deepen my understanding of where things are put, especially in this surround sound kind of spectrum where a lot of things are going, especially the larger movies. It's really intense, and I love to see how affecting the dialogue, things I should be thinking about going into production with these mixes in mind, like how is being done, what's the tastiest thing that people are doing, just stuff I feel like I'm just not sure about. And that's why I wanted to go and sit in with these mixes, which is a really, really interesting thing to do if you have the opportunity.
Oh yes, any production mixer will learn so much sitting in.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll be more confused. When I first sat in on Fosse, and I thought there were some questions about how things were recorded, and I realized that they didn't know how I recorded it.
Yeah,
and the sound, I think he was a supervisor, said when did we when did we dub this? It's like it's not dubbed. That's the wire on this beach scene, and it just sounded so like that's not possible. They didn't record that on the beach. Like we did, but it still sounded like it was dubbed. And I'm thinking like I recorded that. I'm thinking like I'm confused. Like this is that not a good thing? To my ears, I thought it wasn't as natural as I wanted it to sound. and because I had the wire real close, because it was really windy, and they were outside on the beach, and huge shot, and so and there was some whispering, and then there was yelling, so I had to keep the mic fairly close, and it wasn't the sound that I liked, even though they were like, "Wow, this sounds amazing! It sounds like it was dubbed." I'm like, that's not a good thing. It's like no, I don't want. I was like, oh, I don't want it to sound like it was dubbed. I want it to sound like it was in that space. But it was interesting to realize all that when sitting there when they're mixing it. I'm like, oh, okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Special room.
yeah,
Oh,
I was looking at that's Chris Welker. What about the ongoing question on the need for a special room tone take? Well, I think
we did kind of.
We covered that.
Yeah, but I
like a special room.
But to your point about time, it's getting more and more difficult to actually have somebody sit down for 30 seconds and can we just get this clean? I have grips moving around and electricity, because nobody understands, like, this is part of this production, and sometimes I'll have them roll right into the room tone instead, so that everybody's still quiet. If they're going to be quiet.
To me, that's the ultimate weapon. And, then it becomes a question of how you communicate that to post, where you're like, hey, and what I used to do was say, hey, can we, before you say action, just wait 10 seconds? Knowing that there's no way they'd wait 10, it'd be 5. But at least it's 5 seconds of...
We'll take anything.
Yeah.
And what we do is we'll look at the whole take, so a lot of times I'll see that, where even before action, things start to get quiet. I can tell somebody's trying.
Right.
Good. Nice.
But if it's a really noisy scene with a really gnarly background, I would fight for it. If you're in a kitchen and it sounds pretty clean and everybody's giving you grief, do what you can.
Yeah, you have.
But if it's a really bad thing,
battles,
pick your battles and just go, no, this one we actually need.
If it's something consistent, I'll even try to get it after. It doesn't always work out, but but if we have a lot of control of the set, or it's in an apartment and we're not in that area, I'll try to leave something in there and record. It doesn't always work out, but you see what we can get.
Yeah.
I'll try anything.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we can only ask.
Yeah.
And
again, all this, everybody, and now I'll get from a call from, or I'll tell a director, and director goes, yeah, we were having some trouble on the set today, but the production sound mixer says you guys have isotope now, so it's all good. And I'm like,
we don't need to do anything now.
Yeah, let's
just fix it in post.
These are all tools. A room tone is a tool. Will we use it? Will we not use it? I'm not sure. It depends on how the scene gets cut together and what happens, but it's great to have.
And knowing that how they're cutting things together, that's where a lot of experience comes in too, because there's a lot of sound people. There's even a lot of camera people that don't know how the editing process goes.
Right.
Don't know how, what shots are going to cut to what shots. There's so many times where there's a scene where it's a weird angle, or it's on the other side of the line, and I'm telling Kira, like, don't worry about it. They're not going. It's like they're not going to use this shot. They're not going to use this shot. Trust me, when they see this, they're not going to use the shot. So, but that's experience.
And I gotta tell, that's got to be invaluable on the speed that Only Murder shoots at. I can't even imagine. That kind of knowledge is worth its weight in gold.
It is.
I do want to ask that. So these are roughly half-hour episodes.
Yeah.
How many days of shooting?
I think this last, I want to say it was 5 days of shooting. I think 1 or 2 of the episodes were like 6 or 7 because of the bigger production. But mostly 5 days.
So you guys are flying.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of downtime.
Yeah.
I want to get to this last clip.
Hi. Before I tell you what I'm about to tell you, I need your assurance that you will not be angry.
No.
No one wants to do the musical.
Oh. No one?
Well, the cast. Most of the people who would do it, they don't want to do it.
Ah. They don't want to do the musical. That's fine. Perhaps they'd rather I take this spoon and stab myself in the eye with it and just stab and stab, so I'll be too dead to be humiliated when Donna and Cliff get here, which is 5 minutes from now.
I think they're just scared. They don't understand the show, and I don't either, to be fair. But I come from television, and I was trained not to question a script.
You're here.
Well, I am still under contract.
Yeah.
That was a tough scene.
I flagged that scene when I was watching it. I'm a fan of the show,
Right.
And I thought about you
Yeah.
a lot.
Sure.
And it's only my ignorance for not thinking about you, Matthew, too. But
Oh, no, I was watching that scene thinking about Joe as well. And I just, because you guys are going to get into more important things, but just from a story perspective, getting that dialogue the way Joe and his team did, going from the quietness, and obviously then Marty yells, but then Steve is so into himself, like he's so scared, he doesn't want to hurt his friend's feelings, and you can really feel that by the way the dialogue's recorded. And I can't say enough about it.
Yeah.
It's emotional.
It was tough because of the 150 decibel screaming too, and it doesn't start off in one take. He's like, well, I should, and you have to decide, like, how am I going to get each end of this? It's like, will I be able to do it on the boom? So I had lowered the threshold on the boom so that I had to pump up at the mixer a little bit more for the quiet stuff for Marty, and I always have a second boom on Steve, so then that's full open, so that and the funny thing is mixing those, it was the space in between that I was more worried about. You hearing me slam the meter down or up, for that matter. I was worried about that sound because you hear the background change, like it's like a zoom lens. You see the whoosh, and I don't want to hear that, and it's tough to mix that, and that's why I need I need post to really smooth it out. But I do the best I can on set, but it's tough.
The end product, it's everything that you guys said, and it's funny because I was like, when I picked the scene, I was like, is this just me that heard
Right.
this?
Right,
But yeah,
This
I mean,
is
it's not just the explosion, but it is that sort of like meekness almost that Steve Martin's character has. That
Sure. Yeah.
Was there discussion with your boom ops about those moments? Tell me about that.
But I think Kira was booming most of the scene, and TR jumps in to do the off camera. But the idea was, we're like, okay, how much? It was a dance between me, Kira, and the mixer, and the actual mixer. How much should you pull back? Like, she's got to be in there for the as close as possible for the low end stuff for Marty, and then I have to be what you have to do is gauge what the end product. So your loudest moment, you have to go backwards. The loudest moment, and it's like, okay, that's right about there. Okay, now we can figure out how far the mic needs to be to make it not sound super roomy when he's yelling and not blow out, going over. It was a really delicate dance, and and once Kira has it and knows the distance she's locked in, you can't shake her. So she can pull back and get right back in really smoothly, and that's really important for me as the mixer, because then I know how far I need to play it as well, because I don't want to go crazy myself, and because it changes the background, and then I think that lends to, when it gets to Matthew, then he can do a lot more with that and help us out, because it's still difficult. But
yeah,
but that was a real dance.
Excuse me, Joe. I have a question. A question from the post people. Do the actors, when you have these booms doing their stuff, are the actors? Does it bother them, or not a big deal? I'm not there. Just
no. In fact, it's the set environment is so pleasant, and everybody understands. Everybody understands that they don't know everything about each other's job, but they understand that we're all professionals, and if we're doing something, it's for a reason. And that extends to the crew and to the cast, and so whenever I change a mic 3 times, which I normally don't, once I know what the scene is, I can place a wireless mic in the right spot, make sure it's not noisy. But if I go in 3 or 4 times, they'll ask, is there something I can do to help you? Mm-hmm. Not that, what the heck are you doing? Why are you coming in here? They're like, is there something I can do? I said, and sometimes it's good for them to know what I'm fighting against. Yeah. And sometimes it's distracting. You have to pick those moments as well. But with Steve and Marty, they make it really easy, and Selena as well. She's like, whatever we need to do. If we need to do this, they don't change their how they're acting it, but they'll be more cognizant of what they're doing, and if they can help in some way, they will, which is great.
Absolutely. And
you don't always get that.
3 musicians too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
that's true.
They
yeah.
understand.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Mic proximity, they understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to talk a little bit more generally.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was reading the Post in the Times for, because I was at my, anyways. I don't often read both of those papers, but I was shocked last week when they both agreed, both had articles within a day of each other, that streaming shows are getting harder to understand, and that people, according to some study, are turning on subtitles. Now, I will say my joke, which is the last time the Post and the Times agreed, Fiorello LaGuardia was mayor. So what do you guys think about that, if anything?
Yeah, I think that is definitely a thing. I wasn't sure if it was, there's some shows that I watch, not a lot, but a lot of times I understand small things by watching what's being said on
the captions.
The captions, and I you get the broad strokes, but for some reason things get lost in I don't know if it's the mix or it's my TV, but things I can hear what's being done or said, but I don't understand. Like I don't know. It's difficult. I thought it was a combination of the television itself and some of the choices made in production. I don't know, but I find a lot of shows that I do watch with the captions on. I'm not sure if that's
no. I think it is, and I will preface it before I turn to you, Matthew, and say that is not the case with Only Murders in the Building. No, it is. It is.
It better not be. We worked hard.
No, it is. I mean, the dialogue is absolutely clear. It is the opposite of this. But do you notice a trend like this, Matthew?
I notice a trend, but I notice the trend based on streaming being worldwide. Mm-hmm. And so for me, like if you watch a show like Outlander or Game of Thrones or whatnot, they have people from Scotland or Ireland or England or whatnot, and they have an accent or a dialect from that region that me as a person from LA does not have. So I hear the dialogue fine. I just don't understand what they're saying. And I think it's really cool that we have all these worldwide shows now that everybody can participate in, but sometimes you'll need the captions. So I will say I think everything on streaming is a lot more theatrical now, a lot more immersive, and I like that. And also a little bit more of a dynamic range. If, like, for instance, that scene in Only Murders. Now, Only Murders, we try and make as cinematic and theatrical as possible. And when Steve is very nervous going to his friend saying no one wants to be on the cast, we allow that dialogue to be intimate. It doesn't have to be totally in your face, and I think that's okay. Maybe some people at home can't hear it, but if they can't hear it and they have the captions on, they'll at least get the true feeling that the actor wanted to tell that story.
Right. There's a lot of shows that I think sound great, but they sound exactly the same all the time. Like the voices are right there in your ear, and it's exactly that the entire time.
So, somebody made a comment that they were requested to have that kind of sound.
And again, I guess that's one way to do things. But I find a little bit more natural sound is more likable. Even when I'm watching a show, like you said, there's some great shows that sometimes it's like there's a word or two. I'm like, I didn't understand that. I'm going to go to the caption, even though I heard it clearly. It was recorded clearly, but it's something that was like a turn of phrase that we're not used to, and so the captions are great for that. But there's some shows that are just right there, like whispering in your ear the entire time. And there's a moments for that, and even in the show like Only Murders, there are moments where it's like it should be like the whispering of of that evil person in your ear. And yeah, that Cinda Canning, when she's speaking, it's like that's what it needs to sound like. And yeah, there's moments where it should, but not the entire thing. It's a bland the other way. Like I can hear everything clearly, but it's so.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It reminds me of like when people were trying to mix to get on the radio, and it would have zero dynamic range.
Yeah.
It would look like a crew cut.
Like,
I mean, one thing about Only Murders that always intrigued me when I first started on it was the script and the performances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one thing I didn't want to ever do in the sound design of that world of Only Murders is take away from the script and the performances. I wanted to enhance it however I could.
Right.
And it was very important to me. So we spend a lot of time working with the dialogue. We spend a lot of time, hearing a sound, but then getting out of the way so the dialogue can play without interruption and stuff like that.
Right.
And that's purposeful on this particular film.
Yeah, one of the things that really surprised me happily is the building has a personality. Like it has a whole other sonic life that goes on. It's really wild when you start to listen to it.
Yeah.
Well, a funny story on that is I went to New York to do some recordings, and I stayed at the Bowery Hotel. But the Bowery Hotel, I was on the 11th floor, and I recorded the 11th floor.
Yeah.
There's no way I could have used that in Only Murders in the Building. It was so loud that it really couldn't have been used. But anyway, it was kind of funny.
Yeah, it's the flavor of New York.
That is, that is a different neighborhood.
When I get a call from someone, and we did an exteriors, and this is not Matthew in the gag, but from a post sound person, and they're saying, it's so loud. The traffic is so loud. Is there anything you could do? I'm like, have you never been to New York? This is what we do. This is it. The voice is there. You got to find. It's like it's there. There's some meat there. You got to dig it out.
Yeah.
And, but it's New York is when you shoot in New York or shows in New York, I can tell a lot by if it's really shot here by the sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I'd also say, just as a production thing from the post perspective, is like an ocean scene that Joe was talking about or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I've never minded if I can see what I'm hearing.
Right.
So if there's waves and they're at an ocean, as long as the dialogue sounds warm, but I hear waves, it's okay. They're at an ocean.
Yeah.
If they're in New York in the middle of Times Square, it's got a sound, but I can see it. It's where you're supposed to be in. Like I did a show where they were at sea, and they obviously did it on a set right next to a freeway. And, well, that was really hard to deal with, right?
Yeah.
So, I think for us in post, for the production sound mixers, if they're shooting a specific story thing, like being on an ocean, don't worry about the waves as much as the voice.
Yes.
I wish more directors would hear that.
Yeah.
I can't tell you, I don't know about you, but how many walk and talks I've done where the camera's pointed towards the buildings and not towards the traffic.
Sure.
And so, like, you hear the traffic, but let's see the traffic. It'll help us.
Yeah. And if New York is not a real character in the show, it's like just a little backdrop, and it's sad that it happens. But Matthew, that's another scene I even think about. Oh wait, we can't talk about that yet.
Oh yeah, no spoilers.
Yeah.
Well, we should tell people we are going to come back for part 2.
Yeah.
Lindsay had a scheduling conflict. Hopefully, she will be back for part 2.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear.
We'll make sure. I'll put her in the car and
good.
Make sure she's healthy.
And Wyatt Tuzo, just want to go on record saying that as a viewer, this is my favorite New York show in a long time.
Awesome.
Big thank you to both of you and your teams for the impeccable work.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I have one question, and it's got to be one of the last questions. Matthew, how do you, like, when Joe mixes, he's mixing to hand the tracks off to the next team. When you're sound designing and mixing, do you picture who you're mixing for? Like, do you mix differently for a feature than for something that's streaming?
Not necessarily, because you're still telling stories, and that's really what we do. Whether you are doing set design or doing, the outfits or whatever, you're telling stories. So that's what we do with sound. But I would say on a certain level, I do for smaller speakers. I'll make sure certain story points work. So when I did Game of Thrones, and when the dragon would attack or do something, we would mix it theatrically, but then I'd listen to it on the smalls. And if it wasn't coming through, if it wasn't working like it did on the bigs, then I would actually do something to make sure it got the same effect on the smalls. So I'm cognizant of it, but I really like a theatrical type mix regardless of the format. But I am cognizant of how they're going to listen to it. Now, the only difference is if they're going to watch it on their iPhone, that's up to them. I'm not going to do that. That's where I draw the line.
But the funny thing is that I used to do basic music recording for a while, and the thing that we would listen to when we're mastering is listening to it on the crappiest set of speakers we could. It's like, so what is this going to sound like when it sounds great on on these JBLs or whatever I don't know what they were using, but it sounds great on these, but what does it sound like when they're listening to not necessarily the Walkmans, because back then it was Walkman, but like the crappiest speakers, these little household speakers, and we had a set of those that we listened to. And it's funny that you said that, because I'm like, a lot of people are watching on smaller devices, computers, phones. Please don't watch it on a phone.
And I will say, but like now with sound bars and stuff like that, they allow better mixes to be
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
But really, if you're telling the story properly in any type of format, it should be able to be played in any type of format. Maybe you miss a subtlety here or there, but story-wise, it should be rock solid.
Yeah.
I think we should leave it there. No, it's we've taken up entirely.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing. I'm grateful for everybody watching. Grateful, Matthew, for you, and for you, Joe. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thanks to our crew and to your crews. And we will see
here
you.
NTR out there watching, I'm sure.
And we'll see you for part 2. And thanks for watching, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.